I did it, Chris.
Oh, look at you. She's quick on the button. I've got thumb issues.
So who has the PowerPoint to share screen? Do you, Chris?
I have the PowerPoint and I will start sharing screen.
Cool.
I feel very much at home here. Usually my staff tells me what to do. So this feels very good that everybody else is telling me what to do too. This is the way I function the best.
Yeah, always good to be able to take verbal instruction under voice command, right?
Yes. Jump, how high? Yes, that's for sure.
Okay, doing it now. Alrighty.
Well, we're recording and the PowerPoint's rolling. And so, Jim, coming to you then.
Sure. Let's get started. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone has remained in good health over the last 8 months or so, and that the energies to do research are still there. It certainly has been a difficult time over the last 8 months for us all. But we're starting to set the groundwork now for exciting research to come in the next couple of years, and that is through our Sea Grant omnibus calls for proposals. So I'd like to welcome everyone to the seminar or to the webinar. Hopefully we'll be able to answer your questions. That's probably what we'll try to reserve most of the time for. Next slide, Chris. Okay, so here are the 6 people that have been working on pulling this together and pulling together a collaborative joint approach to answering some key research questions in the Great Lakes. I'm Jim Hurley. I'm director of Wisconsin Sea Grant, and I am going to go clockwise around this slide and let people introduce themselves. Chris.
Hello, everyone. Chris Winslow, director for Ohio Sea Grant, but also we're a second head of director of Ohio State University's Stone Laboratory. So it's the island campus in the western basin of Lake Erie.
Kristen.
Hi, I'm Kristen Fussell. I'm the Assistant Director of Administration and Research for Ohio Sea Grant and Stone Laboratory.
And hi, everyone. I'm Jen Hawkswell. I'm the Associate Director of Wisconsin Sea Grant.
And I'm Valerie Brady, Associate Director for Research of Minnesota Sea Grant.
And John Downing, I'm Director of Minnesota Sea Grant, and also my research life is in biogeochemistry, harmful algal blooms, eutrophication, and carbon cycling, things like that at the Large Lakes Observatory with an association with the Department of Biology.
Okay. So thanks, everyone. These are the people that, as you develop proposals, that you probably want to stay in touch with. Next slide. Okay, so I just want to start with the concept of joint proposals and why we're doing this. Each of our programs are aligned for the same time frame that release calls for proposals that look for the best university-led research on coastal issues. For joint proposals, we try to find common themes. We try to see if there's a chance that some of our programs would come together and bring some joint funding to this on themes that are of interest individually to our states, but obviously issues that affect all of the Great Lakes. So this is where the harmful and nuisance algal blooms topic came. You're all well aware of how big an issue this is in the Great Lakes. What it also does is it brings a little bit more funding to an individual project by bringing our 3 programs together, where we put each of our programs supports the research in our state, but it brings together two or more programs and multiple investigators, and gives a little bit more funding to address some common issues. Collaboration is the key. We really like to see the researchers at our universities collaborate with other universities to solve common problems. In a sense, it keeps us from duplicating efforts, but mainly it's for us is for collaboration. We all, as programs, we like to also align with what our stakeholder needs are, specifically the agency needs in our state, and this is right up at the top of all of that. And then we're looking for innovation. We're looking to seed innovation among different types of different programs, different types of approaches that we use, and hopefully, but we're not saying here we're the be all end all of funding for harmful nuisance algal research, but what we are trying to do is bring people together, and you can see that there are other larger funded efforts that have emerged, whether it's the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative or the NSF COPE program that just went through. There are other opportunities that hopefully we can continue to build. So we got together with the Wisconsin program, got together with Ohio and Minnesota to see how we wanted to prioritize certain types of issues. And I'm going to throw it to Chris because we in Wisconsin looked towards Ohio, looked at what Ohio Sea Grant is doing, and how they're linked in with their state agency to address key research needs.
Jim, thanks for that introduction, and hello and welcome everybody. Again, Chris Winslow, Director for Ohio Sea Grant. So Ohio's been dealing with this problem in the Western Basin particularly for quite some time. And since 2015, we've had state dollars through the Ohio Department of Higher Education mobilized to answer a lot of the questions associated with the HABs that are primarily specific to Lake Erie and some of the inland lakes. So there are a lot of answers that we've been able to find, but there are a lot of unknowns still out there. And so in talking with Jim and John Downing and their respective programs, there are a couple that I want to highlight for folks today that I think could be topics that convene across these three states. And I'm going to mention three areas that are research needs gaps for us. But I don't want to make you think that there isn't any work done in here. And actually, I'm seeing some folks on the call right now that are in this space a little bit. But we know that collaboration and building the current efforts they're working on and growing those is important. So from Ohio, really what we're hoping we can get out of this is three things again. So we need to know a little bit more information about in-stream processing. So for Lake Erie specifically, the Western Basin, we know the bloom is really driven by the nutrients coming in from the 1st of March to the end of July. But the blooms don't actually start picking up until late June, July. And so what is 1 March, April, May nutrients doing in the system between their coming off the landscape and actually driving blooms? So we need to know a little bit more about in-stream processing. What is happening to that nutrients from the river all the way out until it meets the lake? The other thing that we are starting to dive into, and again, there's some great researchers on the call right now that are working on this and we can help facilitate connections, is whenever we model this scenario in the Western Basin, so the water primarily coming out of the Maumee and then going into the Western Basin, we've always just kind of looked at the streams as a pipe, a conduit that takes the nutrients from the field and then dumps it into the lake. So we're starting to learn a little bit about in-stream processing and whether that is, erosion from the shorelines or, bed load lifting from those streams. So we really know some, but not enough in the streams. Are they sources and sinks? Are they sources all the time? Are they sinks all the time? Do they flip-flop? So we don't know a lot in that space and we need some help there. And then the other one is what I'm just going to call sourcing. The nutrients that come in can come from ag, they can come from wastewater treatment facilities, they can come from urban and suburban sources. And so for us, we don't know entirely what that contribution is. So how much is coming from manure? How much is coming from commercial application? How much is it what I'm going to call new versus old? So how much of this is nutrients that's coming in because they're legacy fields that maybe had over application 4 decades ago, relative to is the nutrients coming from application in near real time? So the fall or the spring before that next bloom. And so those are a lot of things that we need to know. Again, I will tell you that we've got some folks that are already doing a little bit of isotope work in the sourcing and doing some molecular weight analysis. And so we can put you in contact with folks that are kind of starting to tick away at those. But that's kind of the space we're in. So for us, it's what's going on in-stream processing. So the nutrients that come in early in the spring, what are they doing in that system until they actually manifest as blooms later? How are the streams contributing, either erosion, stream bank, or also stream sediments? And then also more specifics about sourcing. So commercial versus manure versus wastewater treatment plants versus new versus old phosphorus. So that's kind of the space that we're looking to get a little bit more information in. And hopefully when John and Jim Hurley introduce kind of more specific questions to their regions, we can see some synergies or some collaborations across the states. So Jim, that's all I have for right now. And I assume we'll all kind of lay out some priorities and then just open it for questions later then, sir?
Yep, that sounds good. I'm going to go over to John next. So we're sort of from the Maumee to crystal waters of Lake Superior.
And John, you're muted. And then Chris, you could advance the slide, please.
Sorry, John. Here, I've moved it, and yes, you are muted. Sorry about that. And
No,
Jim, way to keep us on task.
Someone mentioned to me yesterday that "you're muted" is the most frequently used term on Zoom meetings. Yeah, okay. Perfect. So thanks, Jen, for moving. I get a PowerPoint not so much because I'm terribly special, but because I didn't want to forget anything. And less is known in Lake Superior, I would say, than perhaps is known or believed to be known in Lake Erie. So so I just wanted to talk a little bit about the situation, and this is relevant to Wisconsin as well as Minnesota Sea Grant. The blooms that we've been seeing are mostly along the south shore of Lake Superior. And, you know, things about Lake Superior are really different. And I think that's one of the really exciting pieces about this collaborative cross-state, cross-lake science is looking at a gradient of different kinds of methods of generating or ways that HABs are generated. So situation in Lake Superior, for those of you who aren't involved in research there, is phosphorus is really decreasing. And Chris said, it's how much nutrient and where the nutrients come from. And I would say in Lake Superior, a big piece of the question is how much of the HAB blooms, cyanobacterial blooms, have anything to do with nutrients? Maybe some, maybe a lot. Phosphorus is decreasing and nitrogen is increasing offshore. There's very little watershed development, and it's pretty time stable. There haven't been really big changes, but what has changed is climate, storminess, temperature. It's a very rapidly warming lake, one of the fastest warming lakes on the planet. Suspended sediment plumes are episodic, and they bring in nutrients. They bring in CDOM, they bring in DIC, so carbon may be involved in some way. Generally, the conditions are warming and stormy and increasing in storminess. And this makes us think a lot about erosional transport and so on. Cyanobacteria are increasing in the tributaries and in the major estuaries. The species that are involved seem to be really similar to those similar but less biodiverse than those that are generating blooms in other places in the Great Lakes. And but some of the ideas about why these are beginning to occur have to do with warming favoring cyanobacteria, storm-driven inshore nutrients, or carbon driving the increased growth. There have been discussions in some of the published work on Lake Superior about propagule supply increased by storms from upstream. And so this is kind of relevant to in-stream processing in a sense, Chris, that it may have to do with biotic processing as well in this particular situation. There are thoughts that excess nitrogen might allow cyanos to explode when phosphorus is pulsed. There may be secondary limitation or maybe tertiary limitation by iron. Questions of light, because it's a very deep lake, and light limitation at depth might limit nutrient uptake. And basically in Lake Superior, the research need is, I would say a priority is understanding what's driving increased blooms and how this can be mediated. Sea grant programs are basically, we exist to help people basically bring the science people need to them to solve practical problems. And a big practical problem is increasing cyanobacterial blooms or harmful algal blooms even though they are not as frequent as in Michigan or Erie, but they still have a very large effect on things like tourism and the economy of the region, or can have, simply because of the iconically pristine nature of Lake Superior. So lots of things going on, but there are a lot of big question marks, and several active research groups working on solving those. But different sorts of questions, I think, than Chris has laid out. But perhaps Erie was like that one day. It's Thanks, Jim, for the chance to talk.
And then I'll just finish off with, we're right in the middle of the gradient, I guess, and in Wisconsin specifically, we've got Green Bay is our analog to the MAMI system and such, and so that's where a lot of our focus is, and a lot of our focus has been on this and other issues, including contaminants. With the development of a TMDL for the Fox River, we're looking for innovative techniques for assessing that, looking at like Chris had said, if there are ways that we can apportion sources, though that's critical for a TMDL approach. The other thing that our state management agency is really interested in is coupling our advances in downscaled climate data to predictions based on current TMDL development or other nutrient criteria. That what we really need to do to be protective is understand how the change in climate is going to affect the management, seeing more spring storms, more rain, those types of things. So they would additionally like to see more work done with pulling together some of the climate scientists, and I know all three of our universities are grounded in that, but mixing that into predictions that could be made for nutrients and hazardous blooms. So I'll pass it back. Jen, are you next on this, on process?
No.
I think that's me.
Oh, okay. Kristen, okay.
Okay. I saw my picture pop up. Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to talk just a little bit about some of the eligibility requirements and kind of the nitty gritty of the request for proposals. So again, just to reiterate, we set out to do this joint proposal to work together so that we can support larger scale projects that tackle these challenges at more of the regional scale. And then also really to foster and develop these collaborations across the state lines. So I think we can only improve the research and knowledge between these states by doing this sort of proposal. Each state is putting forward $100,000 per year for up to 2 years. So the collective total of the grant would be $600,000. So $200,000 per each program. Each state is going to administer the funding to their respective state team. So if you are a researcher in Ohio, you will receive your funds from Ohio Sea Grant or Ohio State University. So all of these budgets will be separated out by state so that we can administer the funds separately. So for eligibility, we have some slight differences in eligibility between state programs. So we just wanted to call those out here. If you do have any questions though about eligibility, please contact your state program and they'll be able to answer any questions that you may have. But just in general for Ohio, our guidelines are pretty loose here. Just that you have to be a non-federal employee and able to accept federal funds. Really what it comes down to is meeting the requirements of Ohio State University's audit so that our sponsored programs office will administer funds to you. and you'll be able to meet the fiscal reporting requirements. For Wisconsin, proposals must be led by an investigator who is a faculty member or person with principal investigator status at their institution in the University of Wisconsin system or other Wisconsin college or university. For Minnesota, again, a non-federal employee based in Minnesota. We also have started a Google list of potential collaborators. And if you'd like the link to that, please send an email to Jen Hawkswell, the same person you emailed to get access to this meeting. And so it's not a requirement, but we did think that would be a good space to kind of foster some of these collaborations or meet folks in other states that may do similar research as you, or may have that missing piece kind of to the research that you're looking for. So I think that's a great place to kind of start this, I guess, kind of matchmaking effort here. And then we encourage the research teams to connect with stakeholders as they develop their pre-proposal ideas. And please reach out to Sea Grant Extension and outreach teams for assistance. And I did see some questions come in as I was going through those requirements. We'll save the questions till the end, but thanks for those of you who are putting them in the chat. I can either go through and try to answer them, or at least we know what to look for before we get to the question session. So thanks for asking those.
All right, and I think I've got the next piece here. And so this is, I'm just really broadly going to go over the guidelines for submitting pre-proposals. The biggest point here to make is that collectively, as a team of 3 different state collaborators, you submit one pre-proposal. So you don't have to submit them all separately to your individual states. You just submit one, and I'll sort of explain to you, the guidelines for doing that. It's all going to go in through Wisconsin's proposal submission system, and that's called eDrop. And a picture of sort of what eDrop looks like is in the bottom right corner. If there are any questions about eDrop, you need any help, just don't hesitate to reach out to me. And we also have a web person. We respond pretty quickly to any questions or requests you might have. And those pre-proposals do need to be submitted by the deadline. That's a hard deadline. The system locks us out after that deadline. So make sure to get those pre-proposals submitted on time. And also, we strongly encourage you not to wait until the last minute. Sometimes questions come up, and very rarely, but if there are technical issues, it's just important to have a little bit of lead time to work through those. So if you're looking for the step-by-step submission instructions, they're all outlined in the Wisconsin's RFP. We released this in early November. We released sort of all of our calls for proposals in one big package. A picture of what that RFP looks like is here on the slide. And I've got the website here that you can access to download that RFP. All of the instructions are on page 5 to 7. And so I'm not going to go through those, in too much detail, but there are a few elements I wanted to mention. There is a pre-proposal description template. That template will be really helpful for you just in sort of addressing all of the things that you need to then copy and paste into eDrop. And we think that will just help your process go efficiently if you start with this template. There's also a CV template for all of the investigators. We ask that PIs all submit their CV. Others can as well if you have associate investigators, but it's not required. I've listed here sort of the types of information we're looking for, so you can see that under the bullet, everything from title on down. And then just a note about budget. For us, it is really important, as Kristen said, the different state programs will be making the component awards to their state PIs. And so what we really need to know for each state is, what portion of the budget goes with which state program. So as you do your justifications and your budget, make sure you do it state by state by state so we can see exactly what details go along with each state program. I just have this note in here right out of the RFP. It's really important when you're in eDrop uploading your information that you save frequently. There's some features of the system that, like moving from one page to another, if you don't save, sometimes you can lose things. That's not intuitive. It says on the page, but I find that not to be intuitive. So hit save a lot and hit save anytime before you move on to the next tab in eDrop as you enter your information. And then if you have budget questions, we strongly encourage you to reach out to your state Sea Grant program. We all have a little different ways of administering our budget and requirements that go along with our budget. For example, Ohio partners must demonstrate a 50% match. Minnesota partners must demonstrate a 30% match, and they definitely should reach out to Minnesota Sea Grant as they develop the budget. And then match is not required for Wisconsin partners. And so with that, we can move on to the next slide.
Okay, so you've managed to navigate the eDrop system. All three states have worked together to put in one pre-proposal. What happens next? Well, what happens next is it's going to get evaluated by a research panel comprised of experts on the topic from that the three states are going to work together to put together this pre-proposal review panel. And listed here and listed in the RFP are the criteria for which your pre-proposal will be evaluated. And so remember, we're looking for the three states to work together. We're looking for synergies, and we're looking to answer these questions we have about harmful algal blooms across the Great Lakes states. And we're hoping that by having the end members of Superior and Erie with Green Bay in there, that this will allow you to be able to do something bigger and broader, because you've got these big end members of Lake Superior just coming into algal blooms and Lake Erie having struggled with them for a long time. And potentially, those allow you to answer the question in different ways. So how well do you address the question? How important is it for our region, and particularly the three lakes involved, Erie, Michigan, and Superior? And then, of course, the standard questions that we review pre-proposals on: scientific merit, what are your qualifications? But remember, we're Sea Grant, so we do a lot of education and outreach. And as John Downing said, we're looking at applied outcomes. We want to know if your research comes up with the things that you think it's going to, who can use that? How can they use it? And how, most important, how will you make sure that they get that information in a way that they can access and understand? We know that a lot of management agencies don't spend a lot of time reading the primary literature. So how are they going to know about your results and how they can use your results to make the situation better across the Great Lakes for harmful algal blooms, or at least understand where they could maybe take action and have an effect? So we're really going to be looking at that. Don't make your outcomes, impacts, and outreach to stakeholders an afterthought that you dash off in 2 minutes, 5 minutes before the pre-proposals due. I can pretty much guarantee you that won't review well. We encourage you to reach out to your respective state program and talk to our extension educators. They can help you brainstorm and think through who would use the results of this research. How is the best way that those people find information? So we're here to help you make that part better, because that's the goal. If our research doesn't get used, why are we funding it? Of course, we're going to look at your budget. It's just an estimate, we know at this point, but does it really seem out of whack with what you've proposed to do? Like, if you promise the moon and ask for $50,000, people are going to scratch their heads. And as I've said several times, we are looking for this to be researchers across all three states in every pre-proposal, and not token participation, not a giant set of researchers in Ohio, sorry, Kristen, picking on Ohio, with the token person from Wisconsin and the token person from Minnesota, who each are going to do 5% of the work. That's not what we're hoping to achieve. We're hoping for the researchers from each state to make significant contributions to the research project and develop significant collaborations with the researchers from other states. Next. So the timeline. You have till January 15th. Jen was really pushing hard to get this pre-proposal RFP out early because we know it's hard to make connections across state lines, and that's going to take you some time. So I encourage you to make use of that spreadsheet that Jen's running to find connections in the other states and work really hard on setting up your team. We will convene the panel in February and get our reviews back to you by late February so that you have until the end of April to work on your full proposals based on the guidance that you've received. Now remember, you cannot submit a full proposal unless you submit a pre-proposal. You must submit a pre-proposal by the deadline to be eligible to submit a full proposal. That's really important. So, and as Jen said, the systems, these new systems, they shut down. We can't squeak it in at, 3:01 or whatever, I'm trying to remember the deadline. The system just locks. So don't, make sure you're watching your cell phone or on time and get it in there. Don't wait till the last second. After your full proposals come in, we go through another round of reviews. And so your proposals will go out for 3 peer reviews from experts in the field who may not even be from the Great Lakes. In fact, they might not even be from this country. So think about that when you write it. We'll have another technical panel to look at all the reviews. We'll run these by our advisory boards or advisory councils for relevancy. And then you will get notified of funding decisions in September-ish. So that's how the process goes. So hopefully we'll be able to have funding to the successful project by February 1st. And that's my part.
And I just wanted to chime in with one more note of encouragement. We do have this Google Doc. If people are interested in adding their name to the Google Doc, you can see other researchers from the 3 states that have also added their name and might be someone you'd be interested in, looking up and partnering with. But you're not limited to the names of the people on that Google Doc. I encourage you to do your own research. If you have questions, you can reach out to your state programs. We can help you brainstorm ideas depending on the kind of work you might want to do, and we can make connections with the other state programs too. And so now, time for questions. And so it looks like people have started asking and responding on the chat window here. Let's see. Does anybody keep track of maybe the first one we haven't been able to address yet?
I think the first one that we haven't addressed would be from Dion, and it's how significant is the mitigation removal of phosphorus, nitrogen in source waters in this solicitation? I think this would be for one of our directors.
Yeah, so I can weigh in on that. We know for, we get a lot of calls from engineering companies or private companies that say, hey, here it is, you drop this chemical in and all your phosphorus problems go away. A lot of those individuals don't understand the scope and the size of the Maumee River and Lake Erie. Now, with the caveat to that I will add, we have seen some work up in the on the landscape as far as holding nutrients on the landscape. But from an Ohio perspective, that's not what we're looking for this specific call. We really want to identify sources and, again, in-stream processing. So we're not really looking for that engineering solution to hold nutrients in this call.
And I might add a little from the Superior perspective. Sources might be important, but they may not be sources of nitrogen and phosphorus. So it may be a different issue. And I think it's there's a similar mystery to solve, but it may not be exactly as Chris outlines when you start thinking about Lake Superior. I spent a long time working in Iowa where nutrient is everywhere but HABs weren't. And there are other conditions that drive them. And so it may be, it's very likely, nutrients are very likely to be less important in the Lake Superior part than they are elsewhere, since phosphorus itself is generally declining offshore, maybe increasing inshore, but those are questions to be solved or answered.
Yeah, and I guess I guess I can add that, you know, I we're always looking for innovative proposals, but in this particular case, we want to make sure that the types of proposals that we're looking for is in line with the other two states too. So there are some other sources, probably other funding sources that for engineering type proposals, including our water resources institutes. But it might be a little difficult to fund it through this particular call because we're looking for something that affects all three of our programs.
So here's another question about what exactly we're looking for. Anne says, I see outreach and communication are key in the RFA. Are you interested in social science research to lend insight to the RFA research questions, or should all the research components be physical, biological in nature?
I mean, I'll take a crack at that again. So for us, when we think about the three things that we highlighted in Ohio, again, the kind of the source identification, I don't really, although social science is critical for a lot of the stuff we do now, in the specific gaps that we have, I have a hard time seeing that social science component to that for the Ohio piece. I guess that would be my first take at it. I don't know how John and Jim feel about that.
I guess internally in our program, we're always looking for good social science proposals. It's something that always comes up short. I mean, I think that if something comes to Wisconsin that has a strong social science component to it, and the overall joint program doesn't fund it, we might look for on the Wisconsin side to piece out part of that for the call for full proposals. We're woefully short in good social science proposals to our program, and we keep trying to find any instances that we can to find coastal related social science programs.
And I'd echo a bit of what Jim said about the importance of social science, having worked a lot in non-market valuation and other areas aligned with that. But I would say that from the Lake Superior perspective, 100% social science really wouldn't work because we really, and this is possibly true for the other two programs, in that we're seeking, I think what we need is to know where these things are coming from and what's driving them, and with ideas about how can they be mitigated. And if there's I would say this also depends on the creativity of the research team. If there is a social or economic aspect to it, I don't think any of us would want to exclude those pieces. But my feeling is, just my opinion, this is not a purely social science call for proposals. There's got to be a lot of natural science in it, because in many cases we need scientists to figure out what in the heck is going on so that something can be done about it in order to help those people who are asking for those solutions. Now, I just said the word people, and anytime we're dealing with people, we need social scientists and we need good outreach. So I hope that's been a sufficiently waffly answer. But in fact, I think 100% social science would not at all fly in this competition. but integration of social science really could, depending on the creativity of the research team and where they thought it should go.
And I'll just finish just one more piece on this. Anne's from Wisconsin. So as Jim said, Anne, to take a look at also the rest of our RFP, we have base focus areas, and a social science project focused on HABs could fit under our healthy coastal ecosystems research priorities, and also under our resilient communities and economies focus area. So there are other places in the Wisconsin RFP. Now those would be sort of state specific as opposed to, a Great Lakes regional approach, but we can talk if you have any questions about those opportunities too.
And I would like to add the same as Jen just said, for folks to look at the Minnesota RFP, which you can't yet, it's not quite out, but we'll have it out within the next couple of weeks. And those two focus areas would also be a place where someone could submit a socioeconomic proposal about algal blooms to the Minnesota RFP alone, not to this joint call.
And then I'll echo that. Ohio has 2 RFPs that are coming out. One that'll come out here before the end of this month, and that will be the Ohio Department of Higher Education one. And then our NOAA Ohio Sea Grant one will be coming out early next month. And so there would be social science opportunities there. Again, I'm looking at the chat function too. And so Dion's question or statement, RFP is, mechanistic understanding of the factors. Like I could imagine that if it was source tracking, and this is again for the things that I mentioned from Ohio, if we were able to say that, the bulk of this phosphorus is coming from dairy cows, well, then there's clearly going to have to be some social science efforts in that space to figure out how we can engage that community to address that source, not in a finger pointing kind of fashion, but to really figure out what are the constraints to, get to that reduction. So I do think looking at the understanding kind of the mechanistics of this, the chemical, biological, environmental conditions is key for right now.
Are there other questions? And as I say, that one comes in. Are indirect costs allowable and or limited as part of the budget? I think that's going to be a different answer perhaps for every one of our Sea Grants, and may also depend on whether you are inside or outside the particular university system that houses the Sea Grant. That's the answer from our program. So Lindsay, I don't know what state you're from, but you would need to contact your state Sea Grant budget person, I think, to work for that, unless Kristen or Jen, you can answer that quickly. Oh, University of Minnesota. Okay, so what I said is, so for you, there are no indirect costs on the budget if you're in the University of Minnesota system.
So Val, that was a little confusing because the slide actually said 30% indirect. So I'm unsure what the
No,
nuance
that's
there is.
sorry, that's match.
That's match. Okay. Oh, I see. IDC. Right. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Right. So yeah. So and I know this is confusing for new researchers. So maybe we should just take a half a second and talk about that. So so indirect costs are the costs that your university charges to keep the lights on and run your lab and provide your mail service and all of that stuff. And these are federally negotiated rates, but because we're a federal state partnership, some of us can get away with not having researchers within our own system be charged indirect costs, but that varies by program. And also, if somebody were from Bemidji State University here in Minnesota, their university would require indirect costs, even though they're coming to us, the Minnesota Sea Grant program. So you need to work with your state Sea Grant program and your university to just figure that part out. Match, however, match is a federal requirement that we have on these, and different states are able to buffer it different ways for their PIs, which is why Wisconsin does not require any, and yet Ohio and Minnesota need to ask you for some percentage of match of the funding. And this is often your own effort. And so you promise some percentage of your effort that's paid by your university to you. You use that effort, not the actual the money, your time is the money to work on this project in addition to the time that we're paying you to work on this project. So that's the match component. And again, our budget people are really good at helping everyone calculate this and figure this stuff out. So contact your Sea Grant program. They'll set you up with a budget person who will help talk you through that if you need assistance.
And just a reminder, we did record this. And so if you have colleagues that weren't able to join you today, or if you now know that what we're looking for is something that a peer of yours would be interested in, please feel free to move that recording around.
And for Wisconsin researchers, part 2 of this would be this afternoon. We have a 3 o'clock for our specific state RFP.
So Chris, if you could just advance the slide, then just to show people email addresses if you have follow-up questions.
Yep.
There we go. Yeah, if there are any questions that come up, just don't hesitate to reach out to any of us from the different state programs. And all of the email addresses are there for you.
And clearly you'll see it's all of our research leads, because John, Jim, and I have a hard time doing anything correctly without great guidance from our team. So this is great. So Kristen has always been an amazing resource for Ohio. So please don't hesitate to reach out to her, and we'll do as much facilitation as we can for you.
We'd all be sitting in corners flailing if we didn't each have one of those names here on the list, Chris.
Yeah.
100%.
Very true. Very true. And Val, we have we're planning anyway a rollout of the rest of our RFP for sometime soon. Do we have those dates yet? I know we talked about them in the last few days.
Yeah, we don't have the exact dates yet. I haven't been able to check in with Marie on when she could actually do the release, but we're very close on the language. We got it approved by our project officer yesterday.
But this is likely to be in early December, a webinar sometime there. Is that correct?
We'd like to give people a couple weeks to hear about it before we have the webinar. So we'll probably release, we should release it by early December and have the webinar in mid-December.
And
And
Chris,
we'll record it for other people.
great. And Chris, your other RFPs are coming out soon?
Correct. So there'll be one coming out here, hopefully before the end of the month. Again, that is a state-driven one, Ohio Department of Higher Education, and that is all HABs all the time. So we are in communication with 5 different agencies within Ohio, and they give us the priorities related to HABs, and we communicate that on their behalf. And then our Ohio Sea Grant one, our NOAA funding, will come out in December. We have intentionally pulled some of our HABs work out of that, so that is going to be more geared towards non-HAB stuff. Aquaculture, marine debris, emerging contaminants, that sort of stuff, just because we have these other 2 opportunities for HABs, and we know there's more issues in Lake Erie than just HABs. And I will tell you that our other call, that Sea Grant one, the one that is non-HABs coming out in December, is also for us driven by state agencies. So for those in Ohio, we can connect you with those agencies to make sure that the work you're proposing scratches where they itch. I mean, we're really trying to do research to application and hope that those projects can inform management decisions and even policy in some instances.
And I'll also mention for folks that might be interested in the rest of the Wisconsin competition too, we have a webinar on our whole RFP later today from 3 to 4. If you're interested, just contact me and I'll send you the connection information. But we've got, we cover, as I mentioned, healthy coastal ecosystems, resilient coastal communities and economies, sustainable fisheries and aquaculture. We've got a target on emerging contaminants. We also have a research target on justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion for underrepresented coastal communities. And we also have education proposals that we are seeking to fund. So that's today.
Any further questions or comments? Well, thank you, everybody. We all look forward to seeing what creativity we've fostered here, and please reach out to us. But you can add the directors to that list for more information too. We sometimes are available to answer questions.
Well, and again, I encourage that. I mean, please don't develop these in a vacuum. I think some of the best proposals are the ones that have a little bit of back and forth with not only the state programs, but with the stakeholders and the agencies. So please let us help facilitate those dialogues.
Totally agree. Same for Minnesota.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.